So to please get us started, I want to introduce the Honorable Deborah Hersman. Chairman Hersman is serving a 2-year term as NTSB chairman. Chairman Hersman was a member of the NTSB since 2004, and before joining the board, she was a senior professional staff member of the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. Chairman Hersman is a committed safety advocate and a valued partner in the transportation safety community. So please join me in welcoming Deborah Hersman.
Sorry. Wow, that's great music to come on up on the stage for. Thank you, Kathleen. The Safety Board held a forum on older drivers, and the public forum was entitled Safety, Mobility, and Aging Drivers. And we held this forum last November, and we heard from many experts, some of whom are represented here today, research organizations, and NHTSA, as well as Joe Coughlin also participated. So here's what we know. Older drivers are a growing segment of our population. The elderly are not concentrated in transportation centers. More than 3/4 of older people live in suburban or rural areas where public transportation is limited. And how many of your parents, for those of you who are sitting in the audience, have retired to golf courses or retirement communities that are outside of town? For those older drivers that live in urban areas, mass transit does not meet their needs, and their use of transit is negligible. The third point I want to mention is that older drivers are not a safety risk. They do not represent a significant risk until they get very old. But the one thing that our panelists were united on is that while there are many age-related decrements and it's hard to predict how those will affect older drivers, dementia and Alzheimer's do represent a safety risk. So let me ask you about some things that I didn't know before our forum that you may not know. One, older women give up driving usually before they need to. Older drivers have fewer accidents than teen drivers, and that older drivers need to be behind the wheel an average of 3,000 miles per year to maintain their proficiency. So one trip a week to the church or to get groceries is simply not enough. As was discussed before, fragility is definitely an issue. Older adults are much more likely to die or be injured in accidents because of the injuries that they sustain. Their bodies are just more fragile. As we age, our bodies change both in geometry and in material properties. For example, take a look at the 17-year-old versus the 64-year-old rib cage, which shows how ribs become more perpendicular relative to the spine in older adults. In automobile accidents, most injuries are rib fractures for older adults. Here's a two-pronged approach that the ITS community can take in order to help prevent older drivers being involved in fatal accidents: prevention and mitigation. First, prevention. Engaging in a user-centered design philosophy to incorporate safety technology in vehicles. So, for example, dashboard electronics can become a distraction because as we age, our ability to switch tasks decreases. And technology must address the performance limitations of aging. I think Joe's probably going to talk about this later, but we've learned so much from Agnes about reduced neck movement and flexibility and slower reaction time. And for some of us, this next slide shows what the world might look like in the morning before we put our glasses on. But for older drivers, this is what the world looks like even after they've put their glasses on, when they've lost the ability to see contrast. But cataract surgery is increasingly making a tremendous difference in the vision capabilities of older drivers. So the second point is mitigation. We can reduce fatalities and mitigate injuries through improved occupant protection. So let me show you a video from the Ford Motor Company. What we've learned about thoracic injuries is so important because inflatable restraints allow the crash forces to be spread across a wider area. And so this technology especially holds promise for people in the back seat who don't have airbags, but even more importantly, for the occupants of the front seat who are more susceptible to seatbelt-related injuries. Since older adults are typically in lower speed crashes, they likely won't need the full force of an airbag in the front seat. And as we've seen with modern dual-stage airbags, reducing the energy of the airbag system in these lower speed crashes cuts injuries while still providing protection. In the future, our cars may know our age, the condition of our bodies, and how we use the vehicle. Future cars will be able to customize crash protection for the occupants. And here's another approach that is becoming more of a reality: a self-driving car. You remember George Jetson. He had an automated flying car. In the early 1960s, when the show came out, he was about 40 years old. So today, that would make him about 89 years old. And with the performance limitations of aging, George would probably be here at ITS talking about older flyers and automation instead of older drivers. The Jetsons was set in 2062, but here in the early 21st century, there is progress on a flying car. I saw one, the Terrafugia Transition, at an air show this summer. But you know what? Before we get to flying cars, here's what may be a better solution for our aging drivers: a self-driving car, or a car that's able to make interventions for the drivers. I was extremely impressed when I had an opportunity to ride along in a Google car this past summer. And I know that they're here this week and visiting with many of the other exhibitors who are here. Let me tell you about the Google car. For one, it has 360-degree perception. That's better than any driver, old or young. Better still, the automated algorithmic driver never gets sleepy, distracted, or drunk. And at the safety board, we love a driver like that. And as I rode in the car when we left the Google campus, I saw how it negotiated a stop sign with pedestrians present, how it merged into interstate traffic, and how even it alerted the driver when the driver needed to take over. The ITS community has a unique opportunity to think about safety from George Jetson's 89-year-old perspective. When you improve safety for an octogenarian, you improve safety for everyone on the road. A rising tide of safety will make a huge dent in saving lives in the most essential but yet most fatal form of transportation. I urge you to consider adding an older driver focus to the ITS agenda. Thank you very much.